The journalism industry is at a crossroads. Revenues are declining, advertising is less, people are not buying print newspapers. Well, these things are causing the news industry to struggle, and the impact is to journalists. Folks are being laid off, buyouts are occurring. I recently had an interview with a journalist from the San Diego Union-Tribune who took a buyout. So what that interview inspired me to do was try to use this platform to not just talk about the joyous and fun and funny things about a journalist's career, but maybe really help some folks. The Journalism Job Seeker series on Flack Talk is an opportunity for journalists who may be between jobs or freelancing but looking for a more stable opportunity to come on, talk about their careers, talk about what they've done, share some more information about their skills with the hopes that maybe a journalism organization or a communication organization is listening and sees them as a potential asset. So take a listen to this episode from our Journalism Job Seeker series here on Flack Talk.
Flack Talk with James Canning, the podcast with the inside scoop on journalists from San Diego and across the nation. If you're a communications pro, have a nose for news, or you're just nosy, this is the podcast for you. Now here's your host, James Canning.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flack Talk. I'm glad that you're all here today. I have a really special guest. We've done some stories in the past about, or I should say, talked to some folks who were working on stories in the past as reporters for the San Diego Union-Tribune. And I'm really honored to have former San Diego Union-Tribune county reporter, Deborah Brennan here. Deborah, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks, James. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, so, I really appreciate the fact that you've come on. Deborah is one of the reporters I've gotten to know here in San Diego. She's covered the county beat for several years, did some political stuff in terms of elections, and then also has covered the environment, education, and a bunch of other stuff we're going to get into. But Deborah, has been kind enough to speak with us. You may recall that we had a conversation several weeks back with Gary Worth of the San Diego Union-Tribune, who took the buyout. And Deborah did something similar. She took the buyout, and she's agreed to kind of come on and talk with us here today about, her career, how she's doing, and I'm hoping that there's some people out there that learn a little bit more about Deborah and realize that she's someone they need to bring on their team. So, Deborah, thank you again for being here.
Hi.
And I'm excited for this conversation.
Of course, glad to talk to you.
So, Deborah, let's jump in. How are it's been several weeks removed now. How you feeling? You doing okay? How you been spending your time? What's going on with you right now?
Well, I've been spending my time doing some of my own writing. I'm working on some fiction, and I just had a short story accepted into an anthology that's going to be published in about a year. So that will be really fun.
Yeah.
And then I also have been applying for other jobs, in communications and media fields.
No, that's great. That's great. Your fiction story, can you give us a little sneak peek? What kind of,
Sure.
where are you going with it?
Okay, so there was a novel that was published. The author is Lisa Castor, and it's called The Cure, and it's a fantasy novel, basically about lycanthropes or werewolves that's set in contemporary America, but also has segments that go back to Viking era Sweden. And so this young woman learns she's part of a family line of lycanthropes, and has her brother's murdered, and then she has to go back and kind of trace her family history and learn what happened and what's happening to her now. So she wrote this novel and then decided she thought it would be fun to do an anthology set in that world. So she put out a call for short stories kind of within the Viking lycanthrope worldview, and so I submitted one that had to do with werewolf and a selkie, which is a seal woman, two college girls who are these shapeshifters. So, anyway,
is that like a genre because that's something that I wouldn't have known that you would be interested in. Is that a genre of reading that you like to do in writing, or?
I read a lot of fantasy and historical fiction, so this fits in with that. And I have not written about werewolves before, but I mean, the idea of shapeshifters is a common theme in fiction or in fantasy fiction. I think it kind of ties into the idea that everybody has hidden elements of their character that maybe emerge under extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
And so it may seem like, I think it can seem like kind of whimsical, but it also has a certain underpinning in our psychology that we don't necessarily show that face, whether it's the wolf face or the selkie, but those aspects come out under certain circumstances. So, anyway, I really enjoyed her novel, and I'd always wanted to write a story about selkies. I'm of Irish origins and love the literature and films related to that myth. Or that folklore, and so I thought I could put them together in this, so it worked out pretty nicely.
That's really cool. I talked recently to another journalist who, from a different outlet, but it's kind of in a similar situation as you, and he was telling me about how he wanted to kind of work on some projects of his own and things that he'd been kind of maybe putting off to the side during this time, and I think that's really cool that you're doing that. I think, we sometimes see journalists in one way, right? You read your byline, we see your stories that you're writing, but the reality is, I've found a lot of journalists, they love to read, they love to write other things beyond, the news that they're reporting of the day. It's a level of depth that you all have that I think is really fascinating, and just the subject matters that you're all interested in beyond your day-to-day job stuff.
Yeah, and I think part of it is just, as reporters, we're readers. We spend half our day, when we're waiting for callbacks or, working on stories, we spend a lot of that time reading other materials. So I think everybody who writes is usually an avid reader. And I think a lot of us have, interests in literature that span the gamut of anything from maybe something very realistic like biographies to crime fiction to fantasy, science fiction, etc. I found that I sort of gravitated towards less realistic literature because I was writing so much about real life, everyday issues in government and politics and environment and science. And so I sort of gravitated towards reading stories that kind of put you in another world.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, like that look, you deserve a break. Like, and if that gets your mind going in another direction and gives you a little bit of a reprieve from all the craziness of politics and the environmental fights and things like that, I think that's fantastic. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't read the way they should. But I think it's fantastic to know that our journalists are doing that kind of stuff. I mean, think about the vocabulary you learn and things like that. It's great. It's great. I learned something new about you today. I really like that. Can we let's because this show is all about journalists. So let's jump into it. Like, how did you want to become a journalist? Like, where does that come from for you? Kind of take us back and then move us forward, kind of over your career and what inspired you and so forth.
Well, I always loved writing ever since I was little. When we had to do the little mini short stories or little essays in grade school, so I always enjoyed that. English was typically my favorite class, and I was on my high school newspaper, where I made some of my best friends in high school, and so that was always kind of in the back of my mind that I might want to do that as a career. And I had an uncle, so I went to Berkeley, got a degree in peace and conflict studies as my undergraduate degree, which was kind of a lot of political economy, looking at the causes of conflicts in the world and how the kind of resource use issues and economic and sociological issues behind them, and then how people have tried to solve them. So that was kind of a good prep for what you cover in journalism.
Yeah.
And then I was trying to decide what to do and considering various careers or various different professional options. And I had an uncle who was a columnist with New York Newsday, and he was like determined to get me into journalism. So he kind of steered me in that direction, and I was inspired by his work. And so I went back to Berkeley for grad school, and then at the School of Journalism there, and then took off from there. I started working as a freelance writer for the LA Times.
Okay.
They had basically these positions that were full-time freelance, so I was covering school districts and environment and cities in the San Gabriel Valley of Los Angeles. That was my first job. And then I went on to a number of other papers in Southern California.
That's cool. That's cool. Are you, I mean, in your time in your career, you and I, we've kind of worked together mostly around county government stuff and all the things that come with that. And then, but like you mentioned, you've had, you've worked at several different places. You've had several different beats over time. Like, to me, when I see that a journalist has had a lot of different beats or they have certain areas that they focus in on, obviously, in some respects, like you become kind of an expert in some of those areas to some degree, at least institutionally within the organizations you're covering or, kind of the regions that you're in. Would you mind talking about like some of those different beats that you've covered and, maybe some of the ones that you really enjoy the most?
Yeah, sure. Well, almost all of my work literally all of my work has been in Southern California.
Okay.
Except for a couple internships when I was in school. But so I've worked at the LA Times, LA Daily News, the Desert Sun, and the Union-Tribune.
Mm-hmm.
And among the beats I've covered local government for a lot of it, which is kind of the bread and butter of journalism. It's local government and public safety, criminal justice. Those are kind of probably the two most essential functions of journalism. So I've covered a lot of cities, county government. I covered LA City Hall for a while, which was absolutely fascinating.
That was one of my favorite beats. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I've covered science and environment at various papers I've worked at. So covering everything from air quality, water quality, California's water supply, which is always an enormous issue, marine coastal issues, biodiversity, climate change. And then I've also covered education. I covered the school districts, all of the North County school districts in San Diego County for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also and during the pandemic, which was kind of frustrating because I was covering more stories about school closures than actual education. And then I've also covered higher ed, covered some of the colleges and universities here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. That's a breadth, and all those, those are all very smart people things. And I say that in a good way, meaning environment, science, education, the politics stuff, I think it's pretty smart, but those first three that I mentioned, environment, science and education, there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of stuff you got to get into and understand that I guess that's part of the job, but to me, some of those subjects were always tough, like the science in particular.
Well, that's part of what was fun about it was that I got to talk to and interview some of the smartest people I've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the climate scientists at Scripps or the marine biologists at NOAA. These are people who are just kind of looking at some of the essential questions of how the world works from a physical and biological basis and trying to understand it to make sure that we protect it. And so I always enjoyed talking to them. And they also had fascinating experiences because a lot of those people, they're not just a lab scientist where they're sitting with their beakers and their lab coat like you might imagine. These are people who travel to Antarctica and Greenland and went on cruises for months on end, studying the deepest depths of the ocean. So their stories were just fascinating. So I felt really honored to be able to talk to them and tell those stories.
Yeah. Did you ever get to travel? Like you mentioned some of their travels. Did you ever get to travel with any of them when you were doing those kind of stories? Or was it more kind of a report out after they came back?
It was more of a report on after they came back. Quite often I'd go out in the field here locally, go down. I did stories. I went down to the salt flats and did stories about a professor who was looking at microorganisms that survive in the most intense, severe saline conditions to try to understand what they might look for if they look for extraterrestrial life on other planets or moons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was super interesting. I went out to the South Bay to look for green sea turtles with a researcher who specialized in that. I've gone and done story. I went out and with a NOAA researcher and looked at kelp beds and looked at what's happening with the kelp beds amid climate change and drought and changing ocean conditions, and got in the water with him and our photographer. And so a lot of field stories here, but I didn't cruise to Antarctica.
I know. Well, yeah, but I think those days are probably gone where journalism organizations can fund week-long trips to do these things.
It's rare to be sent on assignment for more than a day.
Yeah.
Because you got to get back and crank out your daily stories.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to stick on the environmental side of things, because given like all the things you've covered, over the years here locally and across the state, are there, particularly in the environmental space, are there like favorite places, that you have in San Diego or California where like the outdoors and the landscape are just beautiful, or things that you've seen, or like you got like when it comes to our environment, like Deborah Brennan's like must visit spots?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, these aren't super secret, but they may not be something that everybody's checked out. I would say one of my favorite things here in San Diego is to go to La Jolla Shores in the summer in July and August and snorkel with the leopard sharks.
Wow.
If you haven't done it, you have to check it out.
What's a leopard shark? Is it literally a shark and a leopard?
It is a shark, yeah.
Okay.
It is a shark. They're small sharks. They're completely harmless to humans. They eat crustaceans. And their mouths are basically not big enough to bite more than your finger, but they don't even do that.
Okay.
They're very gentle, docile sharks. But they congregate in around the Jolla Shores and a couple other areas in San Diego in the late summer when the waters are warm, and scientists believe it's part of their breeding process that the females perhaps visit those areas to gestate in warmer waters.
Wow.
They're not exactly sure where they come here, but that's kind of the leading theory. But they come by hundreds, like thousands. And when they're there in mass, you can swim in the water, and you're literally swimming over like I don't want to say a herd of them. I'm not even sure what the term for leopard shark groups is, but you're swimming over a huge group of them.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful. They have beautiful like brown and cream and dark markings. And you might be in like 6 or 8 feet of water, and they're just all over the bottom of the ocean floor. And it's an incredible thing to see. It's unlike anything I've experienced elsewhere, even on snorkeling trips in other areas in Hawaii or Florida or other places.
This
cool. Is just a unique phenomena that happens in San Diego, and these animals are just so beautiful and unique and special. So that's a great thing to do, and you don't have to have dive certification or any special skills. You just kind of need a mask to swim over them and take a look.
Okay.
And so you can kind of look online and see when they're showing up there, but it's typically July and August, and we try to do that every summer with my family.
That's awesome. That sounds cool. I'm going to try to find some information and maybe put those some of that in the show notes for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Scripps and NOAA both tend to post things on their kind of presence and arrival, and so you can look that up and see when they're there in mass.
Cool. What else?
So that's one great thing to do in the summer. Swimming at La Jolla Cove is really great too, because you can often see the sea lions there, although sometimes they can get a little aggressive, so you have to be careful about that.
Okay, let's
see Garibaldi's.
Okay, can we talk about that sea lion thing? Okay.
Yeah.
So I've never, I'm newer to San Diego. I've only been here almost 5 years or so, but I've never seen people so comfortable to walk up to a wild animal like they do down on the cove there and like get so close to them. I mean, it's like somebody's walking into your space. I just don't understand why people do it. Like it's all so dangerous. They really shouldn't
be that comfortable. It is, yeah. My husband is a wildlife biologist, and he's pointed out that sea lions, their skull structure is almost identical to grizzly bears.
Really?
So it's not an animal you want to have bite you. Now, they're not super likely to bite you, but it can happen if they feel threatened or encroached on. So you definitely, with any wild animal, you want to keep your distance. So I think some people are getting overly comfortable and confident approaching them.
Yeah. Wow.
But you can be in the same vicinity as them safely.
Okay.
It's not like you have to run the other way when they're there, but you definitely don't want to go up and pet them, which I've actually seen people do.
I have too.
Unfortunately.
And I've seen some of like the people like the little babies, and then the moms like run at them.
Right.
You know, it's just like, oh my
no
gosh.
kidding. Yeah, I mean, that's what any of us moms would do if somebody came at our little one. So.
Well, right. That's I can't believe. No, I love that you said that, because I've said that to people. Like, I'm like, if someone was encroaching on your family or like, you know, invading your family space, like, you'd act the same way. And I just can't believe people don't think about animals like that in some degree.
Yeah, it's kind of my husband has talked about too. There's like this theory about Disneyfication of the outdoors and wildlife, where people have this kind of cartoon sense of what wild animals are like and what the outdoors is like, and that's why you wind up having people approach wild animals or walk 10 miles into the wilderness without water or things like that, where they're not really thinking about the real conditions that they're facing.
Yeah.
So
no, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's another great one. And aside from the sea lions, which are, you know, of course, fascinating, but best observed at a distance, you can also see Garibaldi there, which are the California fish, and they're beautiful redfish, which is kind of cool. You can see anywhere along La Jolla and the cove or the shores, you can see guitarfish.
Guitarfish?
Which are guitarfish, yeah. They're a type of they're in the ray and skate family.
Okay.
And they look like they're shaped like a guitar.
Oh, wow. Like, okay,
really
so like,
beautiful.
are they a Fender guitar? Are they like one of those like brown guitars that are like the acoustic? Like what kind of like?
They're kind of more like your acoustic guitar. That's a good question.
Okay.
I'm not a musician, so I'd have to kind of get more expert advice on that. But
but kind of like but generally like kind of like the acoustic one that someone would have, like the wooden acoustic.
Right, exactly. That sort of 8 shape.
Do you know, is there a head like on the skinny part or on the bigger part?
It's at the end on the bigger part.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh. That's fascinating. See, I would have known this. I'm learning stuff, Deborah.
Cool.
And I am, and hopefully our listeners are too. This is neat. I'm going to try to find some stuff about that too and put that in the show notes. I think it's good to share.
I can pull some up and send it over too.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then another place that's really beautiful and not as well known as some of the other hiking spots is Elfin Forest. It's kind of south of Escondido.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful little reserve. It's near Lake Hodges, and it's got, you know, incredible little kind of oak woodlands there and streams, and that's a beautiful place to go hiking. And they have a cool little nature center there. So that's one of those little hidden gems.
I like that. Look at that. See, folks, you're getting inside baseball from an environmental expert journalist on where to go, what to do, and learning about new things, which I think is important to do on the show. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, like, you know, the environment's one thing. You know, there's a political environment, you know, everywhere we live and work, and there's always politics. And, you know, we got always politics here in San Diego County with the different cities. But, you know, being from Detroit as I am, I was really, when I was doing my homework on you, Deborah, I was like really interested to hear about your time in City Hall in Los Angeles. You know, Los Angeles, the big city, you know, near Hollywood, you know. I was curious, like, about the types of stories. I don't know. I just have this feeling that it was less tame as maybe San Diego County government typically is. You got any like dirt dish or things you've reported on that you could share with us?
Yeah, well, there were. It was a great beat. It was one of my favorite beats ever because City Hall, Los Angeles City Council has 15 members, and so it's kind of like a mini legislature where you had people representing all these different districts of the city, and you had people making deals and alliances and having to kind of work together with other members in their mutual interests. And I worked for a paper in the Valley, the LA Daily News.
Yeah.
which was kind of the underdog paper, and focused on the San Fernando Valley. So that was our neighborhood, and
Okay.
so we focused mostly on those council members. But a lot of what I covered was watchdog stuff. Looking at a bond measure that the mayor was proposing that would have raised fees for police and fire, and we did an investigation to see what happened with the last bond measure, and it turned out the Valley didn't get its share of that. So that was a lot of number crunching and just looking at the response times for different agencies. And
yeah. Did you think you'd have to do a lot of math when you got into journalism? I've talked to a lot of journalists who don't think they have to do a lot of math, but you end up doing some, especially on a story like that, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of math, a lot of statistics. I wouldn't say I'm as good at it as I should be, but I'm able to understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're looking at things like police response times or COVID numbers, it all comes down to stats.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was a big thing. We did a lot of reporting on. I covered the LAPD.
Oh wow!
Not so much from a beat cop perspective, but as an institution. So that was really interesting. The chief at the time was Bernard Parks, who was kind of a lightning rod. He was the first Black chief in Los Angeles, and he was taking a lot of flack for some of his policies. Some of the officers took issue with his disciplinary policies, and so I covered that quite a bit.
Yeah. Was it just like in Detroit that there was similar things like that when I was there? There was this guy named Jerry Oliver, and he was just kind of a more hard-nosed kind of guy, and he came in and he had like books he wanted people to read, and he had things that kind of a mindset that he wanted to create. And it did. I think anytime there's change in a large organization like that, people tend to get their feathers ruffled a little bit.
That was, I think, a lot of what happened. He was very spit shined, and he wanted your shoes shined a certain way and your uniform looking a certain way, and he wanted everybody, on a certain schedule and program. And he was very disciplined. I thought he was really smart. He had a really great command presence, but he rubbed a lot of the line officers the wrong way. So there was a lot of conflict with that. And ultimately, actually, after I had moved on to my next job, that things kind of fell apart with the Rampart scandal, which you probably know about, when there were
not really
officers at the Rampart division actually conspiring with criminals.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Oh man.
But anyway, so the LAPD was definitely a really interesting part of that beat, and it was in the post Rodney King era too. So there was a lot of tension over how the cops patrolled different neighborhoods and how they handled different populations in Los Angeles, and so that was kind of that was in the spotlight as well.
Okay, yeah, that's and those are typically like, higher pressure beats, right? Because there's a lot of attention on them. There's a lot of focus in on, especially when you start talking about criminal justice issues and things like that. Was it a big group of folks that were covering that, or was it kind of like you? And
No.
Did you have a big team or no?
No, it was me and one other reporter, Rick Orlov, who was he was like a veteran reporter. He was great. I learned so much from him. They used to call him the psychologist of City Hall because he just had everybody's ear.
Really?
People would come we had a little office in City Hall, and the staff members, the council members would come in and just kind of vent to him about what was going on. They just trusted him to tell their stories. So
wow.
So that was really interesting to work with him, but it was just the two of us.
Yeah. I was talking to a journalist out of Pittsburgh who works out of Pittsburgh now that was once in Detroit, and he was sharing like some of the things that you would have to go through to like get a source to share information. Like one time he told me he had to go get he had to drive a guy down to a liquor store so the guy could buy a 40-ounce beer before he could like share information about a story. Yeah, and he kind of like reflected on it when he and I were talking about it. He's like, I don't know what I was thinking. It's nothing happened, but I don't know what I was thinking. Like, have you ever? I don't know. Have there been any like interesting or unique ways that you've had to like get information, especially in a big city like that? Like, it's just so different and diverse compared to like, a smaller town, or I don't know, like people are just different. There's so many eclectic individuals.
Well, I don't have any great stories like that. I do recall one of my colleagues at the Union-Tribune saying he had to meet a former police chief at Chuck E. Cheese to interview him because the guy was so paranoid that was the only place he thought they wouldn't be watched.
Oh, wow.
So that was a little weird. But most of the time, I was interviewing people under normal circumstances.
Well,
but
that's good.
Yeah,
for you.
City Hall, it was. At City Hall, it was pretty easy because they would have city council meetings and people would mill around beforehand. It wasn't like a lot of government meetings now where it's very, very formal and very restricted. The council members would mill around and talk to people, and I would just kind of be a fly on the wall and just watch how people were behaving, listen to who they, see who they were talking to, listen to what they were saying, and kind of try to hone in on possible stories. And you could walk right up to them and say, "Hey, I heard you talking about, this ordinance you want to pass. Can you tell me about that?" So it was a very different media environment then. There was a lot more access and a lot more, ability to directly approach the lawmakers. And my friend and colleague Rick would have these little cocktail hours. He'd have little happy hours at our office. And the council members and the staffers would just come, have a beer and, kind of dish on whatever they were thinking about at the time. So it was definitely a more open and informal environment with sources back then. So
that's pretty cool. Like when I was in Detroit, it was similar, right? It was a 2 newspaper town, and the News and the Free Press each had a room kind of like you're talking about. And having working for the mayor at the time, like I would go in there and talk to them, pitch stories, do whatever, and then they would do the same thing. Like they'd be hanging out in the hallways and doing all kinds of stuff, and it was just kind of a normal practice. And you do see less and less of that. Like no longer in Detroit that happens. And it's not, I think the UT used to have I guess a bureau in City Hall or in the county building or something. Somebody told me that at one point. I don't know.
They used to have a bureau. Yeah, I think they still have a bureau in City Hall, but the City Hall reporter David Garrick said, I think it had been useful for a long time for him to be there in that environment. But during COVID, things kind of changed where nobody was at City Hall. So
right.
And I know like 10 years ago, they used to have a bureau at the county, and I actually checked on that recently to find out did they still have one and could I use it. And it turned out they converted it to a security office, which I think is kind of telling.
Oh man, yeah. Well, yeah. I guess we're at a different time.
Yeah.
Deborah, this has been great, and I got a couple more things before we get into our breaking news round. But like I said, like this is. I've learned a lot of things so far, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to kind of just, for anybody who's listening, we got PR people, we have other journalism folks and organizations. I want to talk. I just want to talk about a little bit more, maybe what you're hoping to do next, and if you want to stay in journalism, if you want to come to the dark side and work with us PR people, a chance to kind of just talk to folks about yourself and. What you're hoping for and what makes you different and unique for folks out there.
Okay. So I am looking at a variety of different positions, both in government and different communications positions. I'm definitely interested in going back to reporting more on science and environment, because that's kind of one of my great loves of this job is enlightening people about the natural world and kind of discussing some of its wonders and some of the challenges that we face trying to protect it. So that's my hope, whether it's in a reporting job or possibly working for one of the institutions or nonprofits that deals in that area.
Well, that's great. Look, you on this show, you've showed us, all kinds of stuff that many, 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 many people don't even know. So I think that, it's quite clear that you're well read in those spaces, and obviously the experience that you've had in the government space. I think that it'll be a matter of time that won't be too long that somebody's going to be like, Deborah, We need you. Come on. Let's go. And
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. But in the meantime, it sounds like you got a couple really cool projects that you're getting to do, kind of personal things that are really, I don't know, that maybe free your mind and, let you accomplish some personal goals versus just the ones for, whoever, you work for. They're always two different things there. So, well, that's great. And, we're rooting for you. I mean, I've always appreciated
Thank you.
working with you and, but I didn't always understand sometimes things that you might ask me because I think we've shown right here that you're a damn smart lady, and maybe my PR sense wasn't quite up to snuff on some of those questions, but I think anybody would be lucky to have you here. So
I think one thing with reporters is we always have more questions than people are prepared to answer.
Well, that's a really good thing for the job that you're in, right? You got to do that.
Right.
That's really important. Well, Deborah, I'd love to jump into this thing. We call it the breaking news round. It's like do breaking news, and it's all about these kind of fast answers that I've adapted from the Actors Studio, James Lipton, and it's kind of to get more into your psyche. We've learned a lot about you today, but I'd love to just kind of get through these 10 questions, and they just give us a little more insight into who Deborah Brennan is. Is that cool?
Okay. Yep, sounds good.
All right. So, Deborah, being a journalist, what is your favorite word?
There are so many words I love. It's hard to narrow it down, but I looked at that and I was thinking ephemeral.
What? Say that again?
Ephemeral.
Okay, what is that? Can you just...
So it means a state of change or impermanence.
Oh, wow.
So, and I think it's a beautiful sounding word for one thing, and it also evokes a sense of change. And also, it is the word used to describe ephemeral lakes and pools, which are seasonal water bodies. And there's some of the most magical water bodies in California. There's some lakes that fill up only in wet seasons and just are absolutely full of waterfowl, or little ephemeral ponds in San Diego that fill up with fairy shrimp. So
wow.
I'm going to go with that word.
That's a cool word. Ephemeral. Am I saying that right?
Ephemeral.
Ephemeral. All right. Well, that's cool. I did not know that word. See, look, I'm telling you, I'm getting smarter. Hopefully you folks out there listening are getting smarter too here. Do you have a least favorite word? Are you allowed to dislike or any words as a journalist? What's your least favorite word?
Yeah, I do. I have a handful that I dislike, but I would say my most hated word is impactful.
Impactful. Okay, give me
impactful.
Okay. Break it down for me. Break it down. Why?
Okay. Because it's a word that sounds impressive but says nothing. For instance, people will say we have an impactful program, but that doesn't tell you what the program is or what it does or how it's funded or what the results are. But by saying it's impactful, it's got to be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So that was a word I started hearing a lot in education and also in some government circles, and I felt like I just avoided that at all costs.
That's interesting. My being on the other side of it, right? Being the PR person, I think that most people use that word because they don't know which effect to write. Because there's AFFECT and there's EFFECT. And I think most people, because you can affect change, you can affect.
That's interesting.
And I think most people get confused. They get lazy. They don't want to look it up. And so they go, oh, we're going to impact this, or it's going to make an impact, or I don't know. That's because I've actually found myself doing that. And then I was like, no, you got to look up the damn word.
That's a good point. I never thought of that it's avoiding a confusing word with.
Yeah, if you spell it right or wrong, it means something different.
Right.
I don't know.
I never even thought about that. Yeah. I thought it was a way of sort of avoiding talking about the details.
Well, I'm sure for some people it is.
When you say, I found it used a lot in education, and people would say we have an impactful reading program. It's okay, well, what grades is it for? How many students and teachers are doing it? What is the instructional model? How is it funded? What are your results?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Deborah Brennan asking you questions, and if you want her to ask questions of elected officials and institutions, she's the woman. You hear all those questions?
That's right. That's my specialty, asking questions.
Deborah, what turned you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Well, this might sound odd, but chaos.
Chaos, really?
Chaos, yeah. I love being in the middle of when things are changing and uncertain, and you're having to think and act on the fly and switch gears all of a sudden. I mean, and I think that's what a lot of newsrooms are like, and so and a lot of news events. So that's one of my favorite kind of circumstances.
That's awesome. Chaos. All right. Right. Well, she's ready for chaos, folks. So get ready. She's ready when you hire her. What turns you off? Like what turns you off?
I would say obfuscation, when people are hiding or not revealing information that should be available.
Yeah,
so
that's fair. I would expect that from a journalist. That makes a lot of sense. What is your favorite, Deborah? What is your favorite curse word?
Okay, I don't have a favorite one, but I know which one I use most. It's not the one I would say on a podcast.
Oh, now come on. We're allowed. We do the explicit tag. Which one is it? Because there's a lot of them out there. I don't know.
Okay, it's fuck.
Okay.
It's a word that I unfortunately use too often, including when my kids were toddlers. So they learned that part of their vocabulary far earlier than they should have. So it's not something I'm proud of.
Of course, none of us are. It's an ignorance level that we all take part in sometimes. But I'm glad you shared it. Thank you.
Sure.
What sound or noise do you love?
Well, I mean, one of the ones that probably a lot of people would say is kids laughing. I remember when my kids were toddlers, and they just hearing that peal of baby or child laughter was just pure joy.
Yeah.
Also, cats purring. That's always sounded like a warm, comforting sound to me, and many times it put my own kids to sleep.
Oh, you have cats then? Yeah.
We do, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Is there a noise or sound that you don't like or you hate?
This might offend some people, but Southern rock.
Southern
you
rock.
Turn on Leonard Skinner or Creedence Clearwater Revival, I just tune out.
Oh man, I gotcha. All right. What profession, other than your own, other than being a journalist, would you be interested in attempting one day, or have you dreamt about attempting?
Well, I mean, there's ones I considered that are somewhat related, kind of like intellectually, like law and teaching. Those are things that I'd always thought about and I always respect. But something that's totally unrelated to what I do that I'm fascinated by is gemology.
Okay.
The San Diego Science Museum had an exhibit on the Natural History Museum, had an exhibit on gemstones.
Okay.
This was maybe like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And they had exhibits of all these different types of gems, including a lot of the ones that are mined here in San Diego. Like San Diego used to be a center of tourmaline mining throughout the world. And that's a stone that is a precious gemstone that comes in a rainbow of colors, and it's found right here. And I was just fascinated by the science of it and the art, and how these, a gemstone is kind of like a tiny piece of natural history. And it's also a miniature sculpture, a piece of art.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. That's cool. Is there a profession like that you've come across in your life that you'd like, I couldn't do it, or I would not like to do it, or?
Probably anything in the cold. Anything working in the cold. I couldn't work on a pipeline. I couldn't work on a fishing boat in Alaska. I've interviewed a lot of scientists who've done research in Antarctica, like even some people who snorkel under ice floes in the water.
Really?
Yeah, and just thinking about it made me cold. So I was fascinated by what they did, but I didn't think I could handle those conditions.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, I get. Well, I'm from Michigan. We're used to the cold, but I'm gonna tell you, I've been here long enough now that I think my blood is much thinner, and I agree with you. I think cold jobs are not something I could do either. So
I know it's kind of sad and disappointing how quickly we adapt to not being in the cold. I grew up in the East Coast when I was a little kid, and I can't take those winters now.
Right. Deborah, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
The cats and dogs are waiting for you.
Oh, is that like the cats and dogs that you've had over the course of your life? Like,
yeah, all your pets are there to greet you again.
Oh, that's so sweet. I like that. Well, Deborah, this has been great. I, just like you would probably ask one of my clients, at the end of an interview over time, is there anything else you'd like to share with our Flack Talk listeners before we let you go?
Sure. I would say, I guess I would hope that people would give some thought to the importance of journalism in our lives and our civic institutions. I mean, I think over the past few years, it's kind of gotten a bad rap.
Mm-hmm.
People have come to distrust journalists, and the term fake news has been bandied about too much. But it's really key to maintaining democracy, to have someone who's the watchdog and who's keeping an eye on things and documenting what happens in government and within our local institutions. So even though it might make you mad and it might be frustrating to read something you don't agree with, I would hope that people would appreciate how the role that plays in basically keeping government honest and keeping a spotlight on it. And then I would also say if a reporter calls you for an interview, just call them back.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think people think they can, postpone or stall a story if they don't talk, but the story will go on without you if you don't answer. So if you want your voice to be heard and your perspective to be in there, just call them back and talk to them.
I agree. I've had clients who've done both, and I've always told them you got to call back. So, Deborah, I think that's a fantastic way to close out the show. Thank you so much for coming on Flack Talk. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your story with our listeners.
Sure thing.
If you liked Flack Talk and want to learn more about your favorite muckrakers and newsbreakers, please hit the subscribe button or visit flacktalk.com. New Flack Talk episodes with James Canning air every other week, wherever you get your podcasts.